And welcome back. Jobs First NYC is a not-for-profit organization creating and advancing solutions, breaking down barriers, and transforming the system supporting young adults and their communities in the pursuit of economic opportunities. Joining us now and sharing more details is the President and CEO of Jobs First NYC, Marjorie Parker. And Marjorie, good to have you.
Thank you, Darren, for inviting me to open in this conversation with you. Much appreciated.
Oh, glad to have you. And so please acquaint our viewers just a little bit more with Jobs First NYC and the work that you do.
Absolutely. Jobs First NYC was born out of a crisis 16 years ago. What we faced back then, as we are doing today, was a crisis of young adults where high numbers of young adults were out of work and out of school between the ages of 18 and 24. We were founded through a collaborative community process with stakeholder meetings across the Bronx and Brooklyn and Queens and Manhattan. And our mission is to create and advance solutions that break down barriers and transform the systems supporting young adults and the communities where they live. The way that we do our work, we work with about 160 partners across New York City, high schools, employers, private philanthropy, intermediaries, government, universities. We focus our solutions across 3 areas of work. We look at communities that have high numbers of young people who are out of work and out of school. So we want to respond to the unique needs of each community. Sometimes the conditions are the same, but the solutions are different. We look at education as an avenue for this for young people. So we look at what are the post-secondary opportunities and career pathways we should be looking at, and how do we make sure that we stem the inflow of young people who are leaving high school without connection to the next opportunity. And then we work with nonprofits and employers to identify, design, and advance kind of the practices and policies that we think can get to better outcomes for young people and the communities where they live. And so using what we learn across community, across education, across work, we focus on what are the policy solutions that we should be advocating for that could support the practices on the ground in local communities, across education, and across work and employment that can produce better results for young people. We really use a very disciplined, repeatable process to identify the challenges and incubate new solutions. And when those work, Darren, we then implement and advance those, and then we seek further investment into it. Yeah. So, that process, it takes time, and you have to pay for time. Often folks who invest in developing solutions don't want to pay for long processes, but our process is really driven by our core values that centers community and stakeholders and ensure that their voices steer collaborative efforts and solutions.
Well, give me a little bit about the pandemic, because we know that the pandemic has had a huge effect on the workforce. What can you tell us about how the pandemic has affected the workforce and the people that you represent?
So, at the height of the pandemic, we had close to 400,000 young people who were out of work and out of school. So this was ages 16 to 24, right? So this was last August. By the time we got to the end of 2020, that number was 180,000. Now that may seem reasonable, and you think that this is pandemic impacted, so those numbers are going down. But to give you some context, when we were launched, the numbers were pretty high. By 2010, right after the greatest recession, those numbers were up to about 187,000. By 2019, those numbers were down to 106,000. What happened during the pandemic at end of 2020, we're back at 180,000. So that's an 80% increase over what we had in 2019. And so that's about 27% of the population. So that is pretty significant. The challenge for young workers is, what we learned after the Great Recession, and certainly you cannot necessarily compare the COVID-19 pandemic to the 2018 recession, which wasn't worldwide and primarily impacted the United States. Young people are left at the back of the line, right? They have less experience. A lot of small employers where they usually get their first experience closed down during the pandemic, and an estimated 20% of small employers are not going to come back. That number could be higher. So in the places where young people usually get their first work experiences, that number has shrunk. In the places, some of the other places like Burger King and McDonald's, where they usually get some of those secondary experiences, what we found after the 2008 recession was that the workers, the age of workers ticked up. So those places were hiring older and more experienced workers. So we think that going into a post-pandemic, if we can call it that, economic recovery, is that we really need to focus on what needs to happen for young adults. And that's what led us to really convene 100 plus nonprofit organization workforce, intermediaries and employers over 7 months to really think through what should we be doing for young people.
Yeah, and I want to come back and on. Maybe we'll have you back to talk a little bit more about the report that was released. But share with us a little bit more about how people can get connected and what can people do to get connected to the work that you're doing.
So, you know, through the report, Daren, which is called Equitable Recovery for Young Adults, an agenda for New York City workforce development. Folks can go on our website and look up that report. It has 7 key recommendations, right? It's asking for $100 million in investment in bridge programming. It's asking for $150 million for sectoral employment training, which produced good results for young adults. It's asking for $357 million investment for subsidized employment, which young people will need, $105 million for post-secondary education. Almost 30% of young people leave high school without a plan, right? We want them to leave with a plan. And then we're asking for $58 million for capacity building. We're asking folks to go look at this report, share it with your legislators. It has shows up in your agencies that you work with your legislators who are making policies, and in your local community. The Bronx, for example, Daren, where you are, 37% of young people 18 to 24-year-old are out of work and out of school.
Amazing numbers there. We got to get that. Well, I should say we have to make this better. So thank you for the work that you're doing. Certainly the unemployment rate, huge in the borough of the Bronx. And I know that you're boots on the ground trying to make things better, particularly for young adults as well. Got to have you back and share more. Marjorie, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Daren. Appreciate it.
All righty.
Bye-bye.
Well, if you want more information, visit the website at JobsFirstNYC.org. And of course, don't forget about them on social media at JobsFirstNYC.